This is the Blueprint Podcast, bringing you the latest in cyber defense and security operations from top Blue Team leaders. Blueprint is brought to you by the SANS Institute and is hosted by SANS Senior Instructor John Hubbard. And now, here's your host, John Hubbard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, John Hubbard, and today we have a very final episode and an exciting episode to get through. We've been talking through the 11 strategies of a world-class cybersecurity operations center, and we finally made it to Chapter 11. This special season has been a ton of fun, and this chapter is no kind of small closing chapter. So we have a bunch of really, really fun stuff to get into today. Again, welcome to our favorite panel of SOC experts, Kathryn Knerler, Ingrid Parker, and Carson Zimmerman. How are we all doing today?
Doing great.
I'm excited to be here, John.
Fantastic. Me as well. So this chapter, this last one is called Turn Up the Volume by Expanding SOC Functionality. And it's a grab bag of exciting topics, right? We have threat hunting, we have red teaming, purple teaming, we have tabletop exercises, deception, malware, and we're going to dance across all of those. We're going to talk a little bit about the what and the why of each of these things, the when of how we're going to decide when we're ready for these sorts of things. And then, of course, the how, right? What's the most kind of salient points of getting into this sort of thing. So to kick this one off, I'd love to hear a little bit about what led to the genesis of this chapter and why kind of all of this came to be at the end of the book here.
Yeah, I'll start with that one this time. So these topics are, you're right, they're big topics and they're very important. They're not the topics that you would necessarily start with when you're forming your security operations. They're more of those functions that you would want to add as you get more mature in your SOC functions. So we discussed, actually, there used to be 10 strategies in the first edition. This is the genesis of why there's now 11. We had these advanced topics. They were scattered through some of the 10 chapters. And we decided, you know what? Some of these are worth putting together and are more advanced. So that's why we have this chapter 11. With the exception of one, I would say threat hunting. And we were talking about this earlier, how threat hunting really is could be its own strategy. And if there was another edition, perhaps threat hunting would have its own strategy. So there's maybe 12 strategies in edition 3, right?
Oh, yes.
Throwing the gauntlet down, right?
I love the mention of edition 3 in the last chapter. Perfect. We'll get back around to that. Before we get into that, though, let's keep going with the threat hunting, since that was the first piece of this chapter. What is threat hunting in terms of the definition you used in this book here, and why is that something that teams need to do when they're ready for it?
Right. And actually, I would say that teams should start fairly early in their maturity for doing some threat hunting like things. It's proactively going after adversaries. So it's finding adversaries in your environment that aren't previously detected through your detection scripts or your sensors or your tools. It's not previously from any incidents or that kind of work. So it requires analysts to creatively think about how might an adversary manifest themselves in your environment, whether it be cloud or legacy environments, and how might they hide and move around? So threat hunting is about looking at proactively at things that don't already exist in your environment.
And it's acknowledging that, as good as your tools or detections or anything might be, the adversaries are changing over time, and that there may be ways that they can subtly bypass whatever you have in place, or they may, perhaps you're really great at detection in one particular part of the adversary lifecycle, but not as good in others. And so you're missing something that's happened, or maybe they've come in, through a secondary path that you had not instrumented, the same as other ways, and you're looking for something else that's happened. And so it's really acknowledging that there needs to be depth to your detections, both across the life cycle and in terms of your own personal cycle within the SOC, for continuing to advance how you're looking for things and not just accepting, hey, this alert was published, so that must be the only thing that's happening.
I'll add a couple pieces in terms of how I think about hunting. The first is around what it is and what it isn't. A lot of people use the term hunting today to describe ordinary alert investigation or ordinary incident investigation, and I would generally push back on that. The term hunting, it sounds sexy, It's like, I'm being really advanced. No, you're investigating an alert. Like, that's just as necessary, but like, don't call it what it isn't. You know what I'm saying? The way I think about hunting, and I often tack the word proactive in front of it very deliberately when I'm talking to people about it, is to remind ourselves we're not just talking about incident investigation. One of the ways I think about hunting and to bring structure and purpose and approach to it is you are establishing a hypothesis or a series of hypotheses about the presence of an adversary in your enterprise and using data to prove or disprove that hypothesis. And if we think about proactive hunt in that way, it'll bring focus to the way we go about it.
And so with it being this more kind of scientific way of approaching things and being more proactive about it, is that something that a team can and should jump into right away? Or are those hypotheses needing to be fed by some level of, let's say, CTI that is not going to be accessible in a newly formed SOC, or is maybe it's just not even the priority at that point? Any guidance on when people should consider themselves ready to start doing hunt-like activities, maybe basic stuff, not the super advanced stuff, but just when do you start doing what you would call threat hunting?
Go ahead,
Kathryn.
That is a great question. And I would say the first requirement is that you have the resources. So if you have enough people or analysis time that someone can be rotated off of incident response, for example, if you can only respond to incidents and that's all you can do, you're probably not ready for a threat hunting team just right there. But if you can rotate off because it requires folks to concentrate and not be interrupted, responding in operations is one set of your brain. You have to respond to things. Threat hunting requires you to think. It requires some creativity and downtime to be able to put together the set of scenarios like Carson was mentioning. And then also, how would an adversary get in? Can you break into your own network? Do you know what that would look like? You have to start asking those kinds of questions. So over to Carson. Sorry.
We collide into each other all the time. That's what makes this fun. It's interesting. Hunting, due to the lack of many of the prerequisites that support other areas of security operations, can cause this bizarre inversion for some SOCs that want to do it really early. You don't have to have a SIM. You don't have to have a bunch of detections. You don't have to have a formalized IR process that we would advise that you did. Those aren't hard requirements. In some cases, they're soft requirements. What you absolutely need is a pile of data and some ideas. And those ideas can come from anything. They can come from, wistful hallucinations of your analysts. They can come from, a news report that your CISO read this morning. And they could come from yesterday's incident or, all of these things. In fact, they should all be inputs to your hunting program. And I would advise the audience to bring structure on how, they ideate, prioritize, and execute there. But we're not talking about that quite yet. So this weird inversion is some people can go off and hallucinate with data for 3 weeks. And it didn't require anything but access to data. And that's hazardous because they can go and wander around aimlessly and get lost. And along the way, they're like, well, we found all this bad stuff. And it's like, yeah, but did you finish your hunt? Well, we found bad stuff. Okay, but did you finish your hunt or not? And I've seen so many analysts just tangent when they're doing their hunts. Well-meaning, experienced senior analysts. And they'll just take their analytic bias and go, whoom, and it'll be like, dude, come back. So that's, all of these things that can happen to us is why I think one of the reasons why we're like, yeah, you could do this really early, but there's a bunch of pitfalls there.
I think two things that popped in my mind as Carson was talking. Well, many things always pop into my mind when Carson is talking because it's just so fun. And he goes off on the tangent. But one thing to think about is, you can hunt for a lot in a lot of data, but you have to think about the value that you're bringing to your organization as you're doing it. And if you have that opportunity to normalize your data in some way so that you're not spending a lot of time scrubbing it before you go do a hunt, that's going to help. If you can contextualize that information so that the hunters know what they're looking at, that's going to make it more effective. If you have already put into place whatever your tools or technologies are going to alert on, and you can take that off the table, that gives you a smaller set to work on. The fact is, hunting can be huge in terms of the ideas you can come up with. And you really have to think about, okay, what value you're trying to bring to the organization? What can you automate away? What can you already alert on? How do you not duplicate what you already have detections for and get it down? So I think it can be something that started pretty early in your program, but you wanted to have a few fundamentals in place. You want to be able to you want to let the technology do the technology thing so that when you bring the humans on board, because it's expensive and it takes time, that they're going to be a little bit more tailored in what they're doing. And then I actually want to jump to the end of hunts. Carson brought this one up in my mind as well, which is, what do you actually want the outputs to be? And thinking about the fact that a hunt output that finds badness, that's horrible for your organization that something is going on, but that's good because you found it. But that's not the only thing that comes out of hunts. Sometimes hunts are, hey, we tried this and now we didn't find anything now, but we know we have the data. We know we can find this. We can write a new detector for it. We can now automate looking for this in the future. You can have a finding that says, well, we didn't find XYZ, but we discovered that we have this security hole. We're allowing, remote management to all of these locations that shouldn't be, or whatever it is that you find. Okay, we can provide information back to our security team. You can never, or prove a negative or whatever, but you can give confidence. Like, hey, we heard this new vulnerability was out. We hunted for it. We did not see evidence of that in our environment. And now you can tell your leadership, like, yeah, we've been proactive. We have looked for this. So there's, I think as you're thinking about hunting, there's just thinking about those different outputs and recognizing that they are all viable ends to a hunt to get to that part. And then we could build the whole in between of making sure that you've got the processes to, document, prioritize, understand lessons learned. If you write great queries, make it so somebody else can use it. Like, there's all these things that can happen in between. And that goes back to this idea of, you could have a team of people that are just going off and doing stuff, or you could have a team that is following a process and doing documentation and making this accessible to people in the future. And that's going to yield to, ideally, better, more sustainable outcomes. And, it's one of those areas, and we're going to talk about things like red teaming and pen testing later and some other stuff, but it's one of these areas where you need the documentation to actually make this sustainable and useful for your organization. And unfortunately, that sometimes takes away the fun of, let me just go play with the data for 8 hours. But it's a really necessary part of doing that. And so with all of these today, it's do the hard work and the less fun work of documentation to make the whole program more successful in what you're doing. So, thank you, Carson. You set me off on a whole bunch of paths there.
No. You set me off on a path too. I'm going to double down on what Ingrid just said. Your hunters need to be documenting what they're doing every day. You cannot have a situation where people are doing hunt, or even 4 hours. Like, if someone's going to go spend 4 hours in a day on hunt and they didn't come away with that, with like some queries and some results and some conclusions based on them, like, then how do you know what they just did for 4 hours? And how do other members of the team build on what they're doing? I would argue there's another interesting inversion for hunts, and that is the best hunts are the worst hunts, and the worst hunts are the best hunts. Meaning, what are we going after when we're hunting? Like, one of the major outcomes that we're pursuing is like, oh my God, we found all this bad stuff. It's terrible. And then, and the ideal situation is when you're applying your hunt towards a situation where you have a combination of high business impact, high profile or very threatening adversary. And if they're there, and you've got, and the third piece is having the data to illuminate whether they're there or not. Like, you bring those three things together, and like, that's where you want to focus. There's probably something I've forgotten, but the outcomes of those, are either going to be, well, we didn't find anything except some services were misconfigured. But, every once in a while, you're going to like, yep, that was totally pwned. And that's how you get, more resources for your SOC sometimes. If you do that, you may not get it the first or second time to it, but you do a couple of those every year, 3 or 4, people are going to start noticing that you're returning value to the business. And that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wanted to make an adjacent point. I agree with what my colleagues have been saying here. And we talked a lot in this series about how do you grow talent? How do you give people a reason to stay, right? Making a cool environment. Security operations can be a definite burnout, especially if you're only focused on the day-to-day and the incident response. So I liked Ingrid's point about threat hunting doesn't have to be so big and so, small. It can be small, right? It can be just some creative thoughts on the side. And so I would actually encourage responders to start thinking about, how would I manifest myself in my environment here? What would I look like? And you don't have to do a full scenario analysis and, all that. You can just use these thoughts on the side to get started, kind of an entry level. What would I do? Because at least for me, I need creativity in my world. I need to do things that aren't so follow this rule, and then I have to write this thing down, right? So I just wanted to encourage that, to keep your security operations growing and attract and maintain the talent. Threat hunting is one of those functions that really does get people's juices flowing.
Kathryn's absolutely right. People think about hunts and they're like, oh, I've got to do this 2-month long process. You could do a hunt in 8 hours, depending on your objectives.
I feel like we're going to play Name That Tune, because it's like, I can do a hunt in 1 hour,
Right. What I'm trying to say is you can have this curiosity around I see this and I see this and I see this. And what do I do? How can I put that together? And putting that together might take a month, and it might take an hour, Ingrid, but only if you're Ingrid.
No, only if you're my team. I will give them all the credit for that. And actually, I want to say this is something I've heard from my current team members, from other places where I've worked with hunt teams, which is hunting can also be very lonely. Just asking somebody on their own to go out and look through data, especially if it's, you're coming up with this hypothesis and you're trying to search for it, and maybe it's a little discouraging, you can't find something, it can be hard. But this is an amazing opportunity to pair people up, to do some training, to take people with different skill sets. So maybe you got somebody who's more comfortable with network, somebody who's more comfortable with endpoint, maybe somebody who knows cloud, somebody who doesn't, and think about how you can pair people and do some training. And as Kathryn was mentioning, this is about thinking like the adversary. And so, going back, using the attack model, working through the steps of what you can look for, just so many ways that this can have benefit for your team beyond just you found the badness.
Yeah, pair threat hunting is really interesting idea. I have not really seen or done that myself in the past, but I can see the potential benefits there. But now you guys all got me thinking, pair hunting with a pen tester, with the red team, that might even be a really interesting way to go about it, because they're like, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that, right? Even that kind of thing could potentially work. What I wanted to ask, based on everything everyone just said, was who is the right person to be doing hunting? Is it your tier 1 brand new people analysts? Is it your most senior people? Is it everyone a little bit? What would you advise there?
Yeah, that's a good one. Believe it or not, I'm gonna say something. Let's see how you all respond to this one. But I think you can give it to anybody. I think you can give it to some basic people just getting started, because they have what's called the new mind. They don't know they can fail, right? So a lot of us with experience have our own biases built in on our experiences. So having the beginner's mind, where they don't know that it doesn't work that way, sometimes can help out. Now, that said, you do want a little bit of experienced people doing threat hunting if you're doing these bigger operations like Ingrid was describing there, that's longer than an hour, right?
Yeah, there's absolutely an advantage to more senior team members doing this, because they know the environment, they know what's normal, or maybe not even more senior, just people who've been around for a while. They might be less likely to go down a rabbit hole and get distracted by something, because it's like, oh yeah, we've seen that 1,000 times before, or this is the way it works. There's definitely efficiencies from, oh, I don't have to go look up what this particular command was that I saw, or they understand why a service is running, so that business understanding, that technical understanding could make a difference. So some of it comes down to how much time do you have? Can you afford the time to let people have this as a training opportunity as well as a hunting opportunity? And this goes back to one of the reasons that we really like team hunting, is because you can get the new mind and you can get some of the experience, and they come together in a really great way. And it's just more fun.
That was an interesting comment that Kathryn made. It was provocative, and I like it when we get a little provocative here. I'm actually going to take what Ingrid said a little bit and twist that and respond. I would take it in a different dimension. I wouldn't focus on newness versus oldness or senior versus junior, and flip that around and talk about diversity of experience. When we talk about threat hunt, we think about fusing knowledge of data, the business, and the threat together. Oh, wait, I'm talking about strategy one, aren't I? And if you come into an environment and like you're a big data nerd and you can understand either the threat or the business, but not necessarily both, and then pair that with somebody else who understands the other side of it, you can do amazing things. And I'm really glad that we brought up the point of hunting can feel lonely. And that is why I believe, you're pairing people up who have different perspectives on what we're going to look for. It can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I can totally agree with that. My own experience was we would have people on, hunting rotation, right? And like that was their thing. And it was awesome, right? You got to be creative, and totally 100% agree with that, right? I loved that week. It was like the free form, go try something new, right? Yeah. And everyone loved that. But it was like you were in your own little world of, hey, I'm digging through data now by myself.
There is one other point I forgot to mention, John, in answering your question. I am an advocate for enabling a SOC in terms of its structure and its capacity to rotate people into hunting so that it's one of the things that they do. I would also point out that we want someone in the SOC to own the hunting program, to bring it structure, to bring order, and not just, have people randomly running around in data. I would also point out that there are pluses and minuses to having people in the SOC who were hired just to hunt. In any role in the SOC that does not involve an on-call rotation or an operational component, they can potentially feel like they're a higher form of life. They're like, ha, 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 I don't have to do any of this on-call crap anymore. I'm just hunting. I'm better than you are. And like, we need to be really thoughtful about that in the same way we talked about earlier in the course, where we wanted to be really thoughtful about maybe not saying tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 anymore, because that creates a hierarchy where maybe one shouldn't exist. And then we want to think about those little micro behaviors.
Yeah, good call. There's a whole lot of kind of great points that were made there, and love and totally agree with all of that sort of stuff. Hunting, I think, is one of those things. It can be a great trainer. It can be a great creativity outlet and all that kind of stuff. So definitely would encourage anyone out there who hasn't started thinking about a threat hunting program, has maybe been too hesitant about it, to absolutely step up and get into it. I've run into that myself as well. People are like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. I'm like, you can do it, right? You may not be able to do the world's most advanced hunts, but you can do something that's going to be useful, right? So in trying to not make this an entire threat hunting episode, as much as I would love to do that, we have to move on to our next kind of section here, red teaming. So let's start with some of the basics on red teaming. When you wrote about red teaming, what is your definition of red teaming? And again, why is that something that's going to be useful in a security operations kind of team capacity?
I think when we were working on this section, we were throwing all the colors out there and all the different names. So red teaming, purple teaming, adversary emulation, all these different shades and nuances that have advanced over the years. And we spend a lot of time arguing about definitions because everybody has different definitions on this. But we really, across the board, not getting too caught up in definitions, we wanted to talk really about kind of testing the SOC, testing the capabilities, figuring out how you can improve things. And that might mean everything from, pen testing, and which might be going after a, particular objective, to red teaming, which might be acting as a particular group or set of, techniques that you're trying to do. But both of those will tend to be maybe disassociated a little bit from the SOC itself. You might be having those teams do things on their own and then report back what they've had happen. You might think of pen testing more as a vulnerability type of thing, and red teaming more towards what the SOC's doing. Then you get into adversary emulation, which is going to be more detailed around a particular adversary, even more than your red teaming might be. That may or may not have your blue team SOC component in terms of engagements, but they might follow a particular scenario from that adversary. You might do purple teaming, which is where the red teams and the blue team actually work together and go back and forth, and you're informing each other of what happens. Like, there's all these different ways that you can do it. And it's important to think about what your SOC needs at that point in time. Sometimes you have compliance requirements that require certain types of tests. Sometimes you're a new SOC. And so you want to do something that's going to be more collaborative as you're getting your SOC started. And sometimes you might be, hey, we've done X, Y, Z. We think we're in a great spot. We really want to have that hard somebody come in externally and test us. So there's all kinds of different pros and cons to doing it internally, externally, using the different team names, putting everything else in there. So that covered a whole bunch of different sections rather than what you were just talking about. But we didn't see them as like, oh, you need to think about this and this and this. You need to think holistically about all of these different options and what your SOC needs at that point in time.
Yeah. And another point about definitions and red teaming, pen testing, purple teaming, blue teaming. Here's what I can confirm, having gone through and found I was looking for the definitive industry definition for red teaming. There isn't one. We don't agree on it. Pen testing, same. We don't agree on it. So we use these terms to mean different things depending on what kinds of environments that we're in, right? So as Ingrid, skillfully pointed out, it's all about testing the SOC in one way or another. So not avoiding your question on definitions, it's that there really isn't an agreed upon. We provide some sources in there that you can go back and look at them, but there isn't one.
So if it's about testing, clearly like the SOC can test itself, right? As we write a rule, we're going to be testing it. Hopefully, maybe we're going to get into breach and attack simulation a little bit here. That's a little bit of a test. What makes this kind of test different than some of the other types of tests we're going to cover coming up?
I was looking at Carson. I thought for sure he was going to jump in on that one. So it's hands-on, right? So it's looking at, one thing I'll give you is, so it's about the goals of what you're trying to achieve for a particular set of tasks. So if your goal is to convince your leadership that you have some issues, do a red team, do a pen test, to be able to report out, hey, see, look, we're vulnerable here. We're going to need money for these things. So it's great for raising the awareness, especially of leadership and those who are funding and making decisions for your SOC. Yep.
I think that's one of the classical ways we think about it. One of the ways I think about red teaming and vulnerability assessment compared to the other techniques we've talked about is that it's like the boutique, small batch, artisanal approach to validating things and testing the SOC. And I think, in contrast, like there were days, I'll remember when I first started doing this, there were a lot of people who did quote unquote vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. They showed up, they did a network scan, they ran a vuln scanner, and they delivered the results and they walked away. And it's like, what? I hope that no one here in the audience has experienced anything like that in the last 10 years. When you do a penetration test, they should be operating at a very high level of capability. And they should, one of the ways I think about penetration tests is testing the promises we've made to ourselves or our customers on how we're, protecting the network, protecting the data, protecting the mission. And actually, I've spoken with a number of pen testers and we're going to go after zero trust today. And we're going to test all our zero trust stuff. And I'm like, that's cool. But what's the business outcome that you're trying to validate? Whether that is true or not. Are you trying to validate that, this commerce and billing system, is going to maintain the integrity of all of its payment data? That's what the business owners care about, or, something like that. I'm using shorthand. So when we think about that, it reorients the thinking of both the SOC and the people on the red team. The other way I would also encourage the audience to think about this when we talk about the left to right and up to down of these different testing methods is when people talk about pen testing, sometimes they think about I'm going to go in for 2 weeks, this Monday through the following Friday, we're going to have those 2 weeks. We're going to pwn everything. We're going to write a report and we're going to leave. And then there's other people who take on the opposite end of the spectrum where they're we're going to mess around with the service. We're going to give ourselves 3 months to do it. We're going to learn about the service or set of services. We're going to learn about it. We're going to poke around. We're going to hashtag mess around and find out. And eventually they get to a way where they break all the promises in there successful. And hopefully the service goes and makes their improvements. So when the point is that people are probably entering this conversation with like either one or the other in their mind, think about both, just like Ingrid was talking about.
Carson, you've sparked a thought for me here on this one too, and that is that doing assessments for a living, right? Pen testing, red teaming, whatever we want to call this stuff, that recommendation section at the end of the report should be the beefiest section of the entire report. Anybody can find stuff. It's what do we do about it? How do we fix the systems? What processes do we need to be put in place? So that recommendation section, if that's less than the rest of the report, if it's like a paragraph or two, you're not getting your money's worth. So if you're hiring pen testers or red teamers, I will say that because it happens all the time where you go through this all these observations are found and enumerated for 100 pages. And then you get to the last page, recommendations, half a paragraph, right? Go patch.
Negative.
Way longer.
Yeah. And thinking about what Kathryn's saying there, I think we've all used the, dollars assessment, other types of things. Many times these are done by external organizations. So that might be external just to your SOC itself. Maybe you do have a bigger security program and you've got somebody who can do this separately. Or this might be something where you are hiring somebody to come in for a certain period of time. And this is one of those places where you really, just as you should with all your contracts, but you really need to read the fine print. You really need to understand what that organization is offering to you, how they're going to do it, what kind of information they're going to provide back, what are going to be the touch points, who's going to write what reports. I've worked with teams where they did come in and they did these great assessments. And then they said, well, you have all the data. We're not going to write an executive report for you. We're not going to do something else. That is a team we chose not to work with again. And I've worked, I've known other teams that are out there that do exactly what Kathryn's saying. They will have really great actionable things, or they will work with you to say, okay, what did we find? What does that mean in your environment? You could be doing from a proactive standpoint of improving your security posture. And so there's a lot of variation in the field and what people are offering, which is good because people need different things, but you do need to make sure that you're paying a lot of attention to what you're actually signing up for and what you're going to get as an output from it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that used as a tactic. I mean, we did that in my previous employer. We rotated who was doing the pen test to try to get more kind of variation in skill level and attack techniques and stuff, and didn't just have the one vendor for it. So that can be a great kind of technique for that sort of thing. One of the things that might dip a little bit into the next kind of parts of this conversation I wanted to ask is, when do you introduce, assuming you don't have compliance requirements forcing you or something like that, right? Is this something like, all right, we got a SOC, let's test it out? Or is there like a more logical progression or like the baby step up the ladder up of, more complex testing to consider here? Or do you jump right into a red team once you're fairly confident in the SOC?
I personally have found that starting with something that's more of that purple team, starting with something where you do have an external organization that is coming in, but is doing it very collaboratively with your organization, is great for newer SOCs, because you have things to work out. At that point, not only are you dealing with data and dealing, with kind of new processes and maybe new technologies, maybe especially for new SOC, you might have experienced analysts, but they're not experienced in your environment. You also have leadership that doesn't know what to expect from these types of reports. Like, there's a lot of things that will benefit from being collaborative, talking it through as they're doing it. So, they test something, you look to see if you can actually discover it. Do you even have the data that you need? Okay, did you have the analytic on top of that data? Did you then have the process for the analyst to look at it? Like, you're going to want to work through a lot of those steps. So I find that that's more useful for newer SOCs. And then you may want to do things that are, more blind, more disconnected in terms of, somebody's going in and testing you and you really are doing, hard mode of like, hey, did your SOC pick it up? And okay, maybe you didn't pick it up here, but you can pick it up later, and so you're really trying to test that full chain again versus making sure that each step along the way is better. So that's been my personal thoughts on that, but Carson and Kathryn may have other ones as usual.
Anything to add?
Not this time.
Wow, shocking.
All right, well then we'll jump into the purple team.
This is the paradox of this chapter is we could spend hours talking about each one of these subsections, and we felt a little guilty, even in how we dealt with it.
The thing that follows immediately after this is fairly related, right? Purple teaming, right? So I guess we can jump right into that piece as well. What are you referring to in terms of process when you talk about purple team, or what might someone use as a purple team? Because again, obviously definitions are not 100% solid here, but anyone want to describe what they have seen done and called a purple team test?
That's actually just what I was describing, which is that for me, it's that idea of the red team and blue team are working together. They're proactive, hence you get purple for those who had color theory in college, like I did. And you're actually very collaborative in how you're going back and forth. And so you're really merging the skills, you're merging the opportunities to have discussions. I think this is this great opportunity again for your blue team to learn how adversary actions actually work. It's not done off in a separate environment, and they can, kind of pick up what's actually happening as the team is moving on. So that's where I come into the purple team discussion.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts here. One of them is purple teaming is an area in the book where we could have probably said a lot more and help us all. If we ever do a third edition, I think purple teaming will be a lot longer. I think one of the boilerplate things I have to offer when I talk about purple teaming is purple teaming means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And indeed, there's a lot of different variations that even the same one SOC can take care of. And we touched on that, a little bit in the book. Purple teaming can mean, red with just a soissons of purple, right? Like, oh, we couldn't find them after day 3. Give us a little hint, right? All the way to, red teamer and blue teamer are sitting next to each other virtually or physically and watching what each other are doing, like step by step. And there's a bunch of stuff, in the middle, like synchronizing at the end of the day, swapping roles, taking like a blue teamer and putting them on the red teamer or vice versa. We could spend 5 more minutes giving examples of how to be purple. So one of the first things I think people need to do when approaching purple team is like establish for each other in the conversation, like, we're going to do purple team. Cool. What do you mean? And establishing those options, and they might go in different directions, right? They'd be like, whoa, that's a really cool way to achieve what we wanted to do. When I have interactions with red teams and we say purple, like, you're going to get an emotional response. Oh, we don't have time for that. Or, that's not possible. Or this is not, blah, blah, blah. And then other times people are like, wow, that sounds great. And then you explain to them what you really want to do. And they're like, oh, I don't know about that. So be clear for yourselves. What do you really mean by purple? And consider options.
Yeah, for sure. And, the goals are important to establish. Along with that, what do you mean by purple conversation? It's what are you trying to do? Because sometimes it's about training the blue teamers, for example, which is a different goal than, no, collectively, we're going to work together to fix the tools or the processes or whatever it is, right? So if you're training one or the other, that's a different, especially if they don't know they're being trained, they won't like it. So really working with them on what are the goals of the blue team and what do they need to be? Because here's the argument I always get about blue team in particular. It's that we don't have time. We can't afford to let our defenders do anything other than defend.
And this is going to, potentially bend some people's minds. Some forms of red teaming and purple teaming can wander right back into hunt land. Right. If, because you're going to wander around a network understanding it or run in an enterprise like cloud or whatever. And, you're going to figure stuff out and you're going to flip over rocks and you're going to look at data. Like red teamers will go and look at logs sometimes. And so think about out of the box approaches here to achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my personal experience, again, Purple Team has been an incredible training exercise. It's been an incredible testing exercise. The way that we ran them, which is largely like, let's make a giant list of use cases and make sure everything works that we think works in a collaborative way, which is one of many ways of doing it. But, I can't say enough good things about purple teaming. So, again, on that, another very valid way of testing stuff, but it's very different, right? It's aimed at a very different purpose, and you can get different things out of it, and it's appropriate at different times. So, there's that kind of piece. There's red teaming, and then there's the other thing we want to bring up, which is the following piece here is breach and attack simulation, which is a whole other way of kind of doing a test. Anyone want to speak to breach and attack simulation and what this is kind of as a product category, I guess might be the word here, and then where this fits into the testing that the SOC is actually going to do what we think it's going to do?
A lot of what we've talked about so far, I think we've all kind of taken the approach of it's a set of humans taking a set of actions. They're using tools and technology to do it, but it tends to be something that you do at a point in time. It's got reports that come out of it, as Kathryn was talking about. It's kind of a bigger event sometimes, something you might plan for, do on a periodic basis. And the goal with breach and attack simulation, the companies that have been pulling this out, is to say, okay, how can we do that on a more routine basis? How can we automate it? How can we do something that will allow you to have more of a continual testing against your environment, rather than needing to be a point-in-time solution? And so in some cases, they do this by trying to emulate particular adversaries. It's obviously been late in the day today. Thinking about how to do repeatability, trying to deploy certain agents. So there's a lot of ways that they can come about doing this, but the real goal was for the organizations that have built these technologies is to say, how can we do this kind of attack simulation on a more routine basis in a more automated way that takes the human out a little bit and allows you to have something that's a little bit more repeatable?
And so how does that kind of thing work? If you went out and bought one of these or worked with one of these companies or whatever, like what's the actual thing they're doing to make this a continuous test that is actually happening?
I think that there's different vendors that do it different ways. I would say most typically you're going to have a fleet of agents that are coordinated by some back end, and that those agents will both, do those kind of simulated attack activities on individual hosts, and they'll also do it across the network. So, good breach attack and simulation programs will actually, one of the things that makes them special and really, quite frankly, cool is actually in correct temporal order do kind of an end-to-end attack across the network. And that's that chaining together of activities across the attack framework, across the kill chain, is one of the ways that they kind of stand apart from an ordinary vulnerability scanner. Because for members of the audience who are probably new to this, they're probably thinking, all right, so let me see if I've got this straight. I need a vulnerability scanner to check my vulnerabilities, and I need a red team, but I need both kinds of red teams, and I need purple, and I need hunt, and I need Baz, and like, what? And they're probably feeling a little overwhelmed. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why we chose to put Baz in this section of the book versus earlier.
Yeah, and I have a feeling Baz is an area where we're going to see a lot of evolution in the next couple of years. So where we're speaking and sitting right now, it's a more advanced function, I think, for a SOC to be able to, mainly because of the configuration that's required to really be able to use it in your environment, right? Because once you get it configured properly and going, it can be a super helpful tool for understanding where you might be vulnerable. It's also an area I see AI playing a role in the future. I think AI is going to be able to expand the number of exploits, the ways that we think about attacking a network, just automating different kinds of attacks, and simulating what to do about them. That's the other part, that's really important, is what do you do about it, right? So I think these tools will help us to be able to figure out how do we take action on this in the future, in the very near future, I think. And I think some of the products are already doing that. They're pretty, they're getting there.
One of the other ways to think about breach and attack simulation is when people approach it, they often come in and they're like, we've got to put Baz on every single host in the enterprise. Whoa. Maybe you don't need to do that. especially if if you're going with a commercial solution versus open source, and they charge you per seat. One of the ways I would offer instead is imagine you spent, I'm making numbers up for a second, $2 million or euros or pounds or what have you on a SIEM or on an EDR. And then your BAS solution only costs you maybe $100,000 to deploy on a handful of hosts, and they at least validate that all that fancy stuff you just bought actually works. More advanced SOCs may choose to say, we're not going to consider a detection production unless our BAS has stimulated that detection, which is very interesting. Expensive, but very interesting approach, very robust.
I will note that you threw around only 100,000. That's still a lot of money to me.
Yeah, totally.
And to many small SOCs, that's huge. Yes.
Yeah. Totally different, sandbox of money for small box versus large enterprise, or small SOC versus large enterprise.
Remove a zero or two if you're smaller.
Well, yeah. And to your point, Carson, I think it's really important to note that, going back to chapter 1, 2, 3, looking at what's important to you and maybe focusing some of your BAS in those areas rather than across your whole network. Right. So I think you made a good point there.
Yeah. And with this whole strategy, other than threat hunting, these are all optional things for a SOC. These are things that might be important to you, depending on where you are, what your risk tolerance is, what your budget is, everything else. But the point of this chapter is not to say thou must have every single item that we have listed in this chapter.
Speaking of items we have listed in this chapter, the next one doesn't cost $100,000 or anywhere near it, which is tabletop exercises. Nice, generally kind of free, unless you want to have them facilitated by somebody else, right? And the time it takes to come up with them and run them. However, as opposed to purple teaming, red teaming, breach and attack simulation, can you say a little bit about where tabletops fit in as a testing methodology, even with all this other technical stuff going on?
Yeah, sure. So originally this was a part of the incident response chapter, and I don't know if that was true for edition 1, Carson. It might have been.
I honestly don't even remember what I
right?
We didn't give it its due.
Yeah.
Right? That was on the long list of things we wanted to do better in 2nd edition.
Right. So tabletop exercises are an excellent way to test out your incident response while you're not actually going through an incident. For example, that's one use case that I've seen it very commonly used to do, where you sit around a table. Yeah, but you're going to ask the definition, right? You all sit around a table, which is why it's called a tabletop, and you walk through an actual scenario, whether it be an incident or some kind of event or whatever it is. And you really want to engage the stakeholders that would be involved, the leadership, and it sets the expectations. It exercises, do we have the right processes? Do we have the right phone numbers? Do we have the right people? Did they all leave? So tabletop exercises are a way of testing out the logistics, the tools. I mean, you're not actually usually walking through the tools, but you can, making sure the tools do what you think they should be doing. So yeah, commonly tabletops are used for exercising incidents.
And that's something I've seen shifting is it used to be you sit around a table and do something, and you still absolutely do that. But there are more organizations that are looking for ways to integrate more hands-on experiences as part of these. And this is where it's really important to understand what level you're exercising. You might want to exercise the whole chain from the individual analyst who finds something all the way up to your CISO, your lawyers, your media representation. There could be something where you're like, okay, we want to understand the big major incident and what happens from that process perspective, like Kathryn was talking about. You can also do this at a much smaller scale and say, okay, we just want to exercise within our SOC and understand how we would, like, maybe you don't see ransomware, hopefully, ever, but you want to actually exercise that, or you want to exercise maybe an adversary that you know from your threat intelligence is important to you, but is not something that you have seen yet in your environment. And so you can do this in a lot of different scopes and ways. Which makes it just as confusing as trying to figure out purple teaming, red teaming, adversary emulation, and everything else. Because again, you can do this internally. You literally can just, go out and Google and find some things that you could go work on yourselves. You can hire companies to help you do this. You can bring in external consultants. You can do this a lot of different ways. The importance here is, as with everything, you want to be testing yourself. I mean, so much of this chapter is about, it's why we called the chapter what we did. Like, you want to continue to improve. You need to acknowledge that you might think you're doing better, but you need to go back and test if that is actually the case. And you need to do it from your data, from your tooling, from your processes, from your people. All of those pieces have to be tested in different ways.
You mentioned, that there's a ton of different options for running a tabletop, but what should people be thinking as if they haven't really set up tabletops before, what's a primary thing they should consider when it comes to coming up with a scenario to test?
I can offer a couple thoughts here. When I think about TTXs, my mind usually focuses on exercises that are very impactful for the business, will involve lots of managers and executives practicing incident response pathways that may be unfamiliar to them, and get them to the used idea of, okay, you've heard about cyber. Now let's see how that plays out for you in your role. So ransomware is one of the perennial examples of a TTX. And I think one of the reasons why people choose that is it's potentially very catastrophic to the business, is generally not something you're going to exercise through a pen test. Because when you say in a pen test, we're just gonna reformat 100 computers, people are like, no. So I think that's an example. There's many good elements to a good TTX in terms of having ownership, having someone to organize and drive it, having, a good realistic set of injects, anticipating, how people are going to respond, making sure that they literally see each other. Doing a TTX on a teleconference with 50 people and no cameras on is not a recipe for success. Playing out, having people there who understand some of the personalities present and understand how they're going to play off each other, and being able to anticipate that in advance. There's a lot of kind of interpersonal pieces that you want to consider when you're choosing that scenario and choosing how to play out that scenario.
And that's often why organizations do look towards external facilitators, because the external facilitators may not even have to know your organization as well, but they know how to facilitate. They know how to work with the different personalities, make sure that you're getting different pieces that are in there. And Carson, I can't believe you forgot this, and that you're taking lessons learned from all of this at the end, because you could do all of this. And if you,
how could I forget?
You always are bringing this up, but the important part with all of these is, you have to come up with, therefore, you have learned this, and this is the action you're going to take. It's just like with an incident and lessons learned, anything else. If you don't actually take action, if you don't make a change, then you have wasted your time and money, because you're not actually improving the process in the team.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say about this too is, during an actual incident is not the time to learn that you don't have the right processes or the right people. So when it's not a drill, it's a lot harder and you're under a lot more pressure to get something done. You can actually save time by doing a tabletop ahead of time. It's like, oh yeah, we went through this scenario. So when it's a real thing, it'll go a little bit more smoothly.
There's one random thing we could spend hours talking about TTXs. We won't. There's one random twist on TTXs I'll throw in. We often get worried about scheduling and coordination for TTXs because they usually involve lots of people with very high salaries and very important titles. One way I've seen TTXs run that might enable you to do them better is take everyone and promote them one level in their role in this TTX. So maybe to achieve the same outcome, maybe you don't have a VP there. You have the person who works directly for them as a stand-in, or maybe you don't have the CISO. Maybe you have their deputy who stands in for them. That adds a bunch of different dynamics and substantially changes the outcomes you're trying to seek. But these little shortcuts can sometimes get us some of the same benefits.
Interesting. I like that idea. Yeah, that's an intriguing one. I haven't seen that done before. The final thing I wanted to ask about tabletop exercises, and I know there's nuance here based on who's involved and all of that, is there a general recommendation? Let's start maybe with like just in the SOC tabletop frequency, right? I've asked classes and I get everything from maybe once a year to like every week. Any thoughts on how you would set what the right frequency is for you?
A week's a lot.
Yeah.
I think what they meant was like they're playing card game TTX and stuff like that kind of thing. Not like full blown.
It's interesting, John. I think the way we would all answer this, I'm going to put some words in Ingrid and Kathryn's mouth. I can't wait to see what's about to happen. I think if you asked us this question 10 or 15 years ago, our answer would be somewhat different than it was today, because, I think we've all worked in years gone by when I had fewer grays hair than I do now. Where like cyber was like something people worried about, but big incidents weren't as frequent. And you felt like you needed to exercise the pathways that involved, like legal and PR and different parts of your IT organization. Whereas today they're substantially more frequent. And I think that changes some of the dynamic about, okay, we're instead of saying, well, every year we're going to practice cyber and we're going to practice cyber once. And like, that's all the exposure like the lawyers ever got to cyber. And now I hope that that's happening more often than that. So instead we're thinking about, practicing, some aspect, some rare but catastrophic event that's still realistic. I don't know. What do y'all think?
One of the things I think about is how stable is your organization? If you have an organization where, you're not reorging all the time, and we've all worked for organizations that do that. If you have people who are in the same roles for multiple years at a time, it's maybe not a place where people move around as much. And I've certainly seen this with, construction industry or manufacturing, or those tend to be, there are industries where there may be just less dynamic movement. I think you can get away with some of these larger exercises less frequently because you're going to have the same people in those same roles over time. And you're going to be able to build the relationships and the training and the knowledge that they need. If you have a very dynamic organization, if you have one that's constantly acquiring different, subcomponents, if you have high turnover, whatever it is, you need to think about that frequency and, making sure that, as simple as that phone list is up to date, because in 6 months you might have changed everybody that's there. I think you can also think about this about what levels you exercise. And this seems very obvious, but I will state it anyway. I think inside your SOC, you can test more frequently. You can, pull out the card deck. You can have people that are every 2 weeks, every month, and whatever, doing something that's a smaller level. When you need to get, to the larger tiers, if you're trying to exercise the whole chain, that's going to be less frequent. Because it does take a lot more time and energy to get all of those people coordinated. I will also argue you shouldn't schedule around everybody. You should pick a time and schedule. And if that person is not there, who would replace them? Because during an incident, that person may not be there anyway. So don't try and pick the perfect time. Just pick a time and run with it. And whoever you're able to get, that's what you're going to work with, because that's actually going to show you a lot more than trying to make sure that you've got everybody who can sign off on something.
Yeah, good point. I like that. Yep. Reality hits and you never know who's going to be sleeping and who's going to be sick and who's going to be on vacation. And right. Hackers don't care about any of that. So call the thing when you call the thing and see what you can put together. Right.
Yep.
Love it. Another section in this chapter is deception. And this again can mean a whole lot of kind of different things. So for the average SOC, what are we thinking about when you're talking about cyber deception, and why is that a useful technology to the average SOC?
So I'll start. And what I would say about deception in general is it's not for the faint at heart. And I wouldn't start on the advanced functions, probably wouldn't start with deception necessarily. And Ingrid may disagree, I don't know. But I would say that deception is one of those things where you really want to think about, do you have the right resources who can do something and take action based on whatever it is you're finding out from the deception? That's my start. I would also point out that, MITRE has established the engaged framework for deception to help organizations to think about and plan their deception strategies.
And that's a really important point, Kathryn, is that when you look at that framework, it actually spends time talking about the planning stage as part of the framework. Mm-hmm. Because so many organizations that I will put my MITRE hat on when I was there. We observed a lot of organizations. I will say the people who wrote this observed a lot of organizations that would say, okay, we're going to do this. And it's a technology problem. And it really isn't. It's a process and an outcome problem like many other things. You need to understand what you're trying to achieve from it. Are you trying to actually learn more intelligence about the adversary? Are you trying to stop them from going someplace? Are you trying to feed them false information? Like there's a lot of different outcomes you can want, and you really have to think about this from a planning perspective of what you want to achieve. And it can get very complex. I think where Kathryn was hitting me up is I have also transitioned over the years from thinking of this as very complex to there are some great options out there if you want to do something small. If you just want to put a honey token, false passwords, something in a more controlled small environment that maybe can give you can do some extra monitoring around and get some alerts around that you can do without getting into a full deception platform and planning and everything else. So as with many things, there's a whole spectrum of what you can do in this space, and you can start small, you can go big. You need to think about what your threat profile is, and is this going to actually help you with that? And how you're trying to protect against the adversaries that are out there.
Yeah. And one of the goals that I might start with if I were starting with deception is the goal of detection. So you want to use what you plant to detect bad activity somewhere else in your network, right? So that's where I would start, because that's, if you can place something somewhere where it's innocuous or it's not going to hurt anything else, that's where I would start with deception.
For those listeners that may have not heard of Engage, right? I know a lot of people know about Attack. It's been the hotness for many, many years now. And Engage is potentially not the same profile as Attack is quite yet. Maybe it will be in the future, though, hopefully. Can you give a quick description just of like what it is and how someone who's looking to do deception might leverage it?
Okay. Well, again, it's a framework. It starts with planning and walks through the different ways that you might use deception to, false things, whether it be a false account or a false, document or whatever it is, false network. Ways of engaging an adversary to figure out more about them, to understand the adversary, I guess, to see if they're in your network. And so it's really a framework, I think, is the best thing that I can say about it, or the easiest thing I can say about it. And we do point it out in the book. Ingrid, you got more on that one?
Yeah, I think one of the things to be aware of is that they actually call it adversary engagement versus deception, because deception is one of the techniques that you can use in that. And it's certainly the one that we all think about. And I use the same phrase, Kathryn. I just call it deception because that's so much easier. But I know we know this is in there. And you can look at this kind of, they've broken it out. They have kind of a preparation stage, which is all of the, how do you get ready? How do you figure out what you need to do in this space? They have that operate stage, which is going to be a little bit more like what you're familiar with Attack in terms of, they've got how do you expose information about an adversary? How do you affect what they want to do? How do you maybe elicit a result from something that they're doing? And this is where Kathryn was, I think, hitting on. Some of those can be more problematic to actually run. They can be challenging for your team to put in place. They can require a bunch of monitoring. They can tip the adversary off to what you know. So you really want to think about, okay, maybe you just want to start with collecting and detecting a little bit more of what they have. And then finally, they have this understand component, which is, love this. They put in therefore, what did you learn? What is your after action? What is what you need to do? So it's a little bit different than Attack because they do include that prepare and kind of after action piece, the understanding piece, because they saw it as so important to doing this. And it's a little bit different because it's a lot of different ways the adversary could do things. you can't, there's so much less on less of following an adversary chain and more thinking about what you as a defender might be able to put into place in terms of making this operational within your environment.
Awesome. So great resource for anyone kind of looking to jump into this world, and guide you through the whole kind of planning stage to execution and kind of everything else about it. So yeah, I would definitely wanted to make sure everyone kind of knew about that in case they hadn't heard of that one before. The other two pieces of this chapter, both kind of forensics in a way, right? You got the digital forensics area, and then you got the malware analysis, which you could argue is kind of a forensics in a way, right? Malware reverse engineering of sorts. What is this something that's commonly available in SOCs, or do you see people outsourcing this? What are some of like your thoughts around having these capabilities as like a permanent, we have people in the SOC, we have this expertise in the SOC kind of thing? How do people approach that?
This is an interesting one. The domain of disk forensics, file forensics, memory forensics, malware analysis, malware detonation, static analysis, etc. I have many very large books on my shelf that talk about many aspects of this, and we dared not even attempt to really start talking about these. In fact, we had very interesting conversations when we were writing this chapter about like, do we even put tools in there? Like, if we're not going to talk about this for more than 5 or 7 pages, like, do we even start people on what tools they should go and leverage for this? And that was a very fun series of conversations we had for this. I have 3 thoughts. That was the first. The second is I would offer a bit of symmetry to the journey I've taken in security operations. Some of the first books I read on incident response were like literally titled like incident response in computer forensics. And now we've gotten to a point where computer forensics is almost literally a footnote, an important footnote, but it's not this huge focus. And why is that? It's that we had, 10 and a half other chapters of material to cover. It's less of a focus, due to the increase in cloud computing and all the other media that we use for all this stuff. So with all those things, out of the way, I think one of our big messages in both sections was when people approach either computer forensics or malware analysis, they immediately go to, either I've got to be world class. Like I've got to, if I'm going to do this, I've got to have someone who understands how to not just reverse engineer and tear apart PE headers and do unpacking and break open, this tool and that tool and decode NTFS file tables. Yes, I know I'm moving around here, but one of the messages we have here is it's a spectrum. So to answer your question directly, time and again, SOCs will have little bits of this knowledge in different parts, and some of those people are on a journey to becoming more proficient in either file forensics, disk forensics, runtime analysis, static analysis, et cetera, any of those things, and because they might do it in little pieces. But there are most certainly a lot of SOCs out there that have indeed outsourced this. And they might have an IR firm or an MSSP on retainer, or they might have a service that they've contracted with, or that they can, send stuff into a framework that they don't run themselves and that somebody else does. There's a lot of approaches to cracking this nut without feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got to keep, an x86 or ARM nerd on staff full time, because a lot of people can't afford that. And that's okay.
Yeah, I guess I have some thoughts, lots of thoughts actually on forensics. And the first one is you need to know enough to be able to move around. So the reason we do malware analysis, for example, is to understand what does it look like? So what does it do? Does it detonate? Does it use a specific, ephemeral port? Does it, have a hard-coded password in it? So we like to know things so that we can create detects and to go find it elsewhere and figure out what it's going to do. That's why we do some of this forensics. So it is kind of nice and a luxury to be able to do a little bit of it within the SOC if you can. part of why you can't talk about it in a book like what we just put together is it's very detailed. So you have to know a lot about a lot. You have to know, if you're doing cloud environments, you have to understand not only the name of the service, but what is all the code that goes into that service, and how do you break it down, and how does it, if you hit this part of it, how does it react, right? You can't possibly put all of that into one book. I don't even think there's even one forensics book. What you can learn, though, are what are the basic techniques that are involved? Like, what do you need to know to just kind of move through an environment? So that's what I would recommend people doing, is kind of understand a basic process for how do you do forensics, whether it be network forensics. And by the way, I highly recommend knowing a little bit about network forensics, because that is useful for moving around and scoping an incident, for example.
And I think when you're considering staffing for this, one thing to keep in mind is, how often do you need to do it? Because if you have somebody on staff, like you've said, okay, this is the next hire we're going to do, and you bring somebody on and you have something they need to look at every 3 weeks, what are they doing the rest of the time? And people who have specialized in this area are less likely to want to be the team that is actually doing your alerts, in the queue. I've seen it where maybe your malware analyst is actually aligned with your intelligence team, but they may not be intelligence analysts. So you really have to think about, do you have the work necessary for somebody in that role to do? And if you don't, are there things you can do? I mean, honestly, a lot can be done by just looking at VirusTotal, going to Joe's Sandbox, like looking at all of these open source resources and saying, hey, I've got this piece of malware. Has somebody else seen it? A lot of it is going to be addressed in that way. And then, as I think Carson was pointing out, and then you step back and say, okay, hey, we've got something that's really interesting, new, different, impacting us, whatever else. Do we have an IR provider, an MSSP, some other resource that we've got available? And that's probably going to be much more cost effective, especially for smaller organizations, than trying to bring somebody specialized on. Because even as many years as this has been going on, it is still a skills shortage, and finding qualified people is really hard. And you may just really not need them.
Yeah, and I guess where I was going with my my statement is that, like all the other things we've talked about here tonight, there's a range. You don't have to be a specialist in forensics to understand just enough to know whether your provider is giving you good information or bad information, right? So it's about having enough knowledge to be able to get around smartly, while not spending like days and days and days trying to break down a binary of every piece of malware that every detonation that could happen, right?
The other thing to think about in terms of how you staff this function is, all right, let's say you have a set of circumstances where you're like, okay, I really need a forensics nerd, or I really need an RE nerd. That also might be in the middle of a very large incident, which you're gonna have to call in an IR firm to help you with anyways. So that's one thing to think about as well.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the progression of like using a sandbox and what you can and cannot potentially get out of using an automated sandbox for malware analysis, which I would say most teams probably have access to? You can do it in the cloud, you can pay for a private one, you can use the public ones, whatever it is, versus having someone that has like basic malware analysis skills versus getting into the advanced stuff. Is there like most of the time one of those levels is going to be good enough and you want one or the other or something like that? Any thoughts on what the average team might want to have?
Oh, we haven't used "it depends" yet in this session. We talked about it, but it is so dependent on your organization, your size, your budget, what you run across, how mature you are, whether, and we've talked about other things like hunting and threat intelligence and these other roles that can add a lot of value to your organization as well. And so this is where earlier on in the book, we had a discussion about what are the, 60 different things that you could be doing in your SOC, and you're going to have to pick and select what they are. And so I don't think that this is another area where there just is not a standard. But certainly if you're the 3-person SOC, 5-person SOC, you probably are not going to have this person on your team. If you are a large government organization, like many of, all of us have worked in, you will probably have not just one, but multiple. that are available to you. Your MSSP MDRs, they're probably going to have, your IR partners, they're going to have these folks on retainer. So it depends. I feel like I've gotten that out this time.
I agree, Ingrid. John, I think this is actually a really good way to illustrate why having someone in the SOC who's like conversational in some of these things, be able to help you level set expectations. If you've got some sandbox that the SOC is able to go use, that sandbox is going to have limitations. It could be on the one end of the spectrum. Maybe it's just emulating the Win32 API and there's no way in that it's going to do a heap spray reliably, all the way to, I've got something, then it'll run it on 20 different revisions of Windows 11, and it's going to give us, an hour to execute, and it's going to have got all these great things that help defend against, emulation and sandbox evasion techniques and blah, 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 blah. So the point is that, you can kind of have that person who understands at least the limitations of what you're trying to bring to bear.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was hoping to draw out there, is because in my experience, and I did get a reverse engineering malware certification at one point a while back, and I kind of dove into this for a while. It was super fun, right? But a lot of days I was not doing very complex analysis, and it was, just throw it in the sandbox. And when the sandbox doesn't work, it's like, okay, we just tweak one thing or another, and then you can get what you need out of it. But at least in my organization, and hopefully in most of them, you're not going to be dealing with nation state malware, tearing into assembly and Ghidra and all that kind of stuff every single day. But certainly those people are out there, those organizations are out there, and threat intelligence needs that kind of thing. So that's what you said kind of meshes exactly with what I ran into doing that job at one point as well. So I think that nails that quite well. To wrap up this chapter, I think we've hit the end of the chapter, but to wrap up really the entire book, there is still some more content in here, and that is the appendices. And so I didn't want to end this final episode without giving you a chance to discuss a little bit about what's in there, since we're not going to be walking through probably all of that. What is there? Is there anything you want to call out specifically for resources there?
Well, I think simply pointing to the readers that they exist. We spent a lot of time in this book. For example, we have, how many references in this book did we have? I think
I was just going to look. It's 522.
Huh.
Well cited.
I think that's one of the things that I would argue is different about this book than a lot of other books that you as the readership, as the audience will go out and get us, is we went out of our way to collect references to other resources that might have a different point of view, right? And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I mentioned this part first, is for the malware analysis and forensics section, and we were like, okay, and here's all these other wonderful resources that are going to do a far better job than we ever could. Go check them out. There are some pieces here in the appendices. I'm scrolling to the part of the book where they didn't fit. So we talked about and that leads right into Appendix A, foundational SOC books, where we're like, we should list the other big ones that are out there you can go and buy. Don't take our word for it. Look at these 12 other resources. I'll mention one more appendix and then I'll yield to my co-authors. Everyone asks, how do you get started? We spent an appendix on that and kind of laid it out, I think, over 18+ month period of time. Your mileage will always vary when you set up a SOC, but we explored, some of those pieces.
Yep. And then the next appendix C, is about what documentation should we be maintaining in a SOC. We also get into some of that engineering and system administration information that is useful, especially if the engineering team's not within the SOC, if they could be outside. What documentation do you need and how do you communicate? And then another one is Appendix D. What should any analyst have within their reach? So it's a table of the different kinds of things, communications and lists and resources that they might have. And with that, over to Ingrid.
Yeah. And if you are a numbers geek, We kindly present Appendix E on data sources and censoring technology. So if you want to think about, number of devices and the value of it, and how many events per day you might get, recognizing we use the term average really loosely because we all acknowledge that not all SOCs, are the same.
Really loosely.
Yeah, but this gives you, if you're like, okay, tell me a little bit about data loss prevention, and it's not something I've thought about before, and how big is that data store going to be? And so think about that from a comparative point of view. So you might want to think about your EDR versus your DOP versus network technology versus cloud, hosting versus whatever. It's a way to start thinking about that, especially for new SOCs that are trying to, or if you're considering a new data source or technology to bring in, to have a little bit of an understanding what's there. So lots of good stuff that, this is another we're like, oh, we could do an appendix on this, we could do an appendix on that. And we're like, no, we're going to actually publish the book now.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. There we have it, right? 11 entire chapters straight from the source. Dove in deep, got some extra stuff out of you all, and really, really appreciate all the time and dedication for this. As always, with the goal of the podcast, why I created it, was to try to just spread the word of, awesome cyber defense practice to as many people as we can. And I think, this season, we've seen the numbers, right? As we've kind of gone through and seen some of these episodes released, there's been enormous interest in this. So a huge thank you to you all. Before we go, any kind of closing thoughts on anything that we may have not said throughout any seasons or otherwise that we want to say before we kind of wrap it up here for the final technical episode? We may do a bonus episode. We probably will. The authors have said we want to do a little bit of a kind of behind the scenes, what it's like to write a book. So everyone can stay tuned for that one. But in terms of the technical content for season 4, I think that puts a wrap on it. So anything before we kind of close it up here?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, this stuff is evolving rapidly. And that's one thing I really, really felt as we were writing this. I could feel that as we were writing it, it was already evolving. Part of why we had to say, all right, let's just publish this book is because there was so much more. It's always changing. So you can't just rest on this book. You got to keep going and you got to keep learning. And so I would suggest using the book as a launching point for your learning career and keeping that going.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you to anybody who actually made it all the way to 11. We've had I won't speak for Kathryn and Carson and John. I've had a wonderful time doing this. It's been great to just hang out and chat about everything. Hope it was useful for folks. Hope they got something out of it. And, if anybody actually reads the 522 references that we've included and finishes that whole list, please let us know. And we'll be happy when you write edition 3 of the book.
I definitely +1 to what Ingrid and Kathryn said. This has been great. Through the journey of first edition, all of the completely unexpected circulation that got, through this, our focus has always been bringing what we knew as individual practitioners, as now managers, all 3 of us, as MITRE employees, former MITRE employees, and working with many of our colleagues at MITRE, bringing all that knowledge to bear. This reflected not just what we learned ourselves, but, we've worked with all of us together, probably over this time, probably hundreds of different engineers, analysts, managers, you name it, and various security operations centers. So it was great to get this out there and get feedback on it and iterate on it. I would say my number one closing thought is all about change and continuing to iterate. We have to change our thinking in security operations. There's no such thing as done. And when we shift our minds away from feeling like, if I just do this one more thing, I'll be done. There is no done. Done is implementing the business processes and the thinking to continually iterate on what the SOC does and how it does those things. That's to me what done looks like, is that you've embraced that rhythm of altering what you do and how you do it.
Yeah. Love it. And totally agree with everything you all said. Thank you so much for the time and effort put into the book and everything else. To the listeners, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard here for the podcast crowd, wherever app you're listening on, if you could do a quick rating and comment, those always help. That boosts us up in the ranking. People find us, gives us more kind of ammo to justify further and further seasons. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm not going to say smash the like button and ring the bell, but I would like a gentle pressing of the like button, perhaps a subscribe or whatever, right? We're probably going to continue to do more podcasts. And this season, right, season 4 is the first time we've done video. So for the podcast listeners, if you didn't catch the video and you want to reference back anything without digging way back in the podcast feed, all of this is on YouTube. I'm sure Google's transcribing it as we speak, and it's going to be searchable. So hopefully this lives on forever as kind of the record of this book and what we have in it. And same thing with social media, right? We'd love to hear from you. Tag the authors, tag me, tag SANS Cyber Defense, and always happy to hear what you all found most interesting so we can continually improve these kind of things and fuel more seasons. So with that, a big thank you to the authors for writing the book, for making the book free for the community, for committing to version 3 right here tonight, right? Just kidding.
Oh,
Too soon, John.
Hashtag too soon, John.
We won't do that to you yet, but yes, I'm sure everyone would love if you could do it. So another, year's break, whatever, right? Whenever it's ready for another version, we'll be happy to read it. Happy to have you back on. And again, big thank you for taking all this time, nights and weekends and all that kind of stuff. I know you're all very, very busy. So with that, at least the technical portion of season 4 of Blueprint is a wrap. We will get our bonus episode up after we get a chance to record that as well, all about creating books. I know we got people out there interested in what it takes to create some content like this. So I think that'll be a real interesting kind of extra discussion we'll have. But for that, I think we're done. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. And to the listeners, we will be back after a short break. I don't know when exactly. I can't commit to it, but there will be a season 5. I just don't know when it'll happen yet. So there will always be more Blueprint. So have a wonderful time, everyone. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you for the next round. Have a good one.